Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Secrets of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Adras. Thank you very, very much for joining us in what we anticipate to be a very, very interesting conversation with an old friend. If you'd like to contact us with some ideas or suggestions for future shows or feedback, just email me at rabbiadress@jewishsacredaging.com. Visit the website or the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. The website is jewishsacredaging.com. And if you'd like to be a sponsor for some of these podcasts, again, just email me and we'll take it from there. We are very pleased and honored to welcome back an old friend, as I mentioned, Reb Simcha Raphael, to talk about his new book, Musings with the Angel of Death. Looks like this, Musings with the Angel of Death, subtitled Poems of Love, Life, and Longing. Simcha is also the founder, director of Da'at, the Institute for Training and Awareness of Death Issues around Judaism, the expert on Judaism and the afterlife. I think his major book is now in its third printing, if I'm not mistaken, Simcha.
Third edition, 25th anniversary.
25th anniversary. So you took some time out of all of this to write some poetry. So first of all, mazel tov on the book. And I got to ask you, because I'm used to reading your prose, what's with the poetry? Is that a deep longing of yours? This is the first love?
Well, it turns out I have been writing poetry on and off for most of my life. I did a whole bunch when I was younger, and there's a section in the book on juvenilia.
Right.
And when I was saying Kaddish for my father, I was saying it at an Orthodox synagogue, and it wasn't the kind of place where people sat around and said, well, how are you feeling today? And tell me about where you are in your mourning process. It was Behurachum, it was the starting of the prayer, and then it was ending with Kaddish, and then you went home. And when I went home, I remember my father had died at the end of December, so it was the long months of winter for a while. And it was a colder winter, just about 20 years ago. I would process what I was going through by writing poems.
Wow. Okay.
So I wrote a whole series called Kaddish Echoes, of which there's a couple in this book.
In the book.
And to speak to the title of the book, I have also been doing day-long bereavement counseling skills training. I taught at LaSalle University for many years, and the New York Open Center of Blessed Memory has a program called The Art of Dying. It's now run by One Spirit Seminary, and they have about 10 weekends of dying, death-related programs, and I do their bereavement training. And in doing this particular workshop through the years, I do a meditation where I have people seeing themselves walking on a journey. Up ahead is the angel, is the image of death. What does death have to say to you? What do you have to say to death? Now prepare for death to leave. And so, I mean, I've just given you 30 seconds on that, but it's longer. I have heard hundreds of people share with me their story of an encounter with the image of death and the conversation that ensued. And one day it just hit me. It actually was on my 72nd birthday. I want to write my own summary of my conversation with the image of death, with the angel of death. So that first poem emerged, and then it became not quite the title, but the title is a variant on that poem. It spoke to, as Jill Hammer says in the foreword to my book, it spoke to the inner life and the inner experience that was behind my urge to do the academic work.
Okay. So the opening poem, as you alluded to, is called The Angel of Death Awaits. And I'm reading this poem. And the first line in the second stanza goes, I recognize her, loving, radiant, and luminescent. She is a she, or maybe a they. Okay, so let's get right down to it. Talk to me about your image of the angel of death as a she, as a woman.
Well, if I just presented to you research on those images that showed up for my students, sometimes it appears as a headless horseman, and sometimes, so that classical image and early modern art of death, of the headless horseman with the scythe, and sometimes it appears as a radiant being, more female in form. And what I surmise is that as a culture, we're moving from seeing death as a dark figure and a headless horseman to much more of a luminescent being of light.
Really?
Well,
why? How come? Why?
In 1900, Sigmund Freud releases the interpretation of dreams, and that begins cultural transformations of attitude towards human sexuality. And Lord knows, 124 years later, we're still working on that one. In 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross writes On Death and Dying, and that launches cultural transformations of attitudes towards death and dying in our culture. And that's 55 years. And so we're seeing transformation happening within the culture with new people doing death doula training in hospice and green burial and medical aid in dying. And what Kubler-Ross says, death is nothing to fear. Death is simply a transition. It's a leaving go of the body and entering into another state of mind, another state of awareness. And certainly spiritual teachers across the planet and the Hasidic masters for sure understood that death was not to be feared, but death was simply an entry into another realm that was luminescent. And what my work is trying to do over the years, again, as Jill says, I want to remind us that we are both mortal and eternal. That the fear of death is we don't even accept our own mortality. It's like, don't talk to me. Don't use the D word. Don't talk to me. But when we accept the reality of dying and death, ain't none of us getting out of here alive. I mean, not today. Relax. We can open up to a spiritual view of death, which recognizes that there is a consciousness that survives bodily death. And that's what I wrote about in Jewish Views of the Afterlife. And that's what gets embodied or in-worded, I guess you would say, in some of my poetry.
But talk to me also a little bit about, because you do allude the connection, the Da'at Institute that you run focuses on a lot of this stuff from a variety of different. What's the website in case somebody wants to connect with you?
Da'at is a Hebrew word for knowledge, and it's an acronym, DAAT Institute.net. DAAT Institute.net.
So the second poem in the collection, Lo Alecha Hamlecha Ligmor, it is not your duty to complete the task. You introduce a phrase in the first stanza about stealth invaders, which when I read it, for some reason, I'm sure my therapist would love to talk to me about, that just jumped out. The poem begins, at the center of all my sorrows, I frequently felt a presence that was not mine alone. I know I'm not the only one who encounters such feelings. Repeatedly, I became present to these stealth invaders. Who are the stealth invaders? It's a great image, by the way.
If we're truly interconnected with all life and all beings, as a spiritual view of the world of humanity would suggest, then we can't not be feeling or let me say it in another way, when we open up to being interconnected, we can certainly access and feel much more of the pain and the suffering in life. And this poem that you're talking about is my climate poem. It's a gorgeous day. The sun is shining. I could go out today in a t-shirt. But if I stop and think it's only 2 or 3 days away before some next weather event, or there was an earthquake last week, or who knows what's coming down the pike. So in reflecting on feelings that are not necessarily in my local experience, but in the part of me that's interconnected with all life, those are the stealth invaders. They just show up.
It's part of your work, and you alluded to this about the fact that it's interconnected. This attempt to remind people that we are part of nature itself, that we're not beyond nature. Is that part of, because I got that sense in reading some of the poems and even what you said, and we've talked about some of this and some other times that you were on the podcast. How difficult is it for people to understand that they're just like, that we're part of nature?
With all due respect to New Jersey, we've become so damn urban. We need to check the Weather Channel to find out what the weather is. We need to check our calendar to see where we are in the rhythms of the sun and the moon and the cycles of the planet. If we were living more of a rural life, more of a life connected with nature, we would experience that in a different way. So I think that in my own life, I am aware of wanting to be more connected with nature, but I'm very urban myself. I've described myself as an Amazon Prime indoorsman.
And by the way, the book is available on Amazon. So
good segue.
Just in case, but we're all part of that new tribe. It's a new tribe. The Amazonians, whatever, or the Primians.
Well, the one poem, the one I wrote called "Wind," I was out in Bucks County at a friend's house, and the house had beautiful open glass window, and I was just watching this torrent of wind blowing, and I was aware that wind and earth and nature were all interwoven, and that in any moment things could change. And then I end the poem saying, and now it's time for me to just put on a coat and go outside.
Speaking of back to talk to me about this very, very interesting and very personal poem you wrote in the book, The Last Kaddish.
I think it's small enough to read. Can I read a poem?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Do you have a page number for me?
40.
So I wrote poems throughout the year. I was saying Kaddish for my father. And I don't think we have a very good way of ending Kaddish, because Kaddish ends after 11 months. We don't really have a ritual for it. So I felt I needed at least to ritualize it in some way. So I wrote this poem. The Last Kaddish. 11 months have passed. No fanfare. No grand ritual moment. Barely a whimper and a sigh, followed by the ongoing perennial question, why did you have to die? Because your time was up. And now, according to the wise advice of Rabbi Moses Isserles, who said parents only get limited, not maximum time in Gehenna, whatever that is, 11 months after we buried you on a freezing cold day, Today, with the last of autumn leaves making their earthbound descent, today the streaming waves of the Kaddish Channel go silent. My status as a mourner among the community of Israel, among the community of humanity, changes suddenly and forevermore, almost as suddenly as my life changed the day you died. And today, like every day the past 11 months, I am a fatherless child. I am a son without a father, a little boy standing alone without his daddy. I am a man orienting myself in the world with only a compass of memory and legacy, flying by the seat of his pants. Today, as I utter these words, Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shmei Rabbah, one last time, as a mourning child, I will praise the great name, the one that helped me, guided, and healed me throughout these months of mourning. And when I say, Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevorach Leolam U'Le'amei Almaya, I shall look upwards to the supernal worlds, stretching through all time and space, and contemplate the mysteries of life, death, love, and loss. Once more, as I've done each and every day since you died. And for a moment, there will be a tinge, a subtle heart-opening, soul-stirring, mind-meandering, Kaddish-connecting moment, a momentary passing visit with my Father, as I praise, adulate, adorn, and bless my God, thanking God for presence, for peace in my life, and in the life of all humanity. And as the words end, 11 months of Kaddish saying have passed, the Kaddish Channel goes silent, and now I know I will never be the same. Life will have changed forever. And I think it was sort of a jam a little bit on the words of the Kaddish, but it was also an awareness that this process of saying Kaddish that people go through can be very heart connecting. And sometimes people have a hard time stopping to say Kaddish. And I was just reflective that this has been spiritually nourishing for me. And now it's over, and I will forever be a man without a living father.
You know, in reading some of these poems about your dad and Kaddish, and again, they're intensely personal poems. I felt, I know you've alluded to that. But rabbinically, why do you think, because I've seen this, and I don't know whether you've seen this in all of our travels to synagogues and organizations around doing our work, why do you think there's this retreat from the morning rituals? I mean, rarely do people sit shiva for 7 days. They truncate it down to 3. I've seen it even 1. And the idea of the tradition of saying Kaddish for a parent for 11 months, why do you think there's a retreat from this?
I named the Da'at Institute Death Awareness Advocacy and Training, and I really see myself doing advocacy so people understand the kinds of resources that Judaism does have. And I think the retreat comes in response to a lack of knowledge that we've sort of sanitized our Jewish ritual life, tried to make it a little more homogeneous to the extent that it fit into American Protestant culture. We didn't want to be too weird and too expressive. And I think the Shiva abrogation and the minimizing of Kaddish, sanitizing funerals. I've seen funerals where they use a little earth shaker instead of putting earth on the casket. Those kinds of things are fitting into a not indigenously Jewish style. But I want to say, I think that's changing also. I think that's changing. My mother-in-law died during COVID. It was the end of December of 2020. And so she had COVID, so my brothers-in-law wouldn't sit Shiva with my wife because she had been exposed to COVID through her mother. So we sat alone in the house, and my wife is a great organizer. So those were the very early years. She set up Zoom Shivas every single night, and she had her old BBYO friends and her old Toronto friends and her old friends from another part of her life. So there's 6 nights of Zoom Shiva. And she said, you know what, I'm going to say Shiva throughout Shloshim. I'm going to say Kaddish throughout Shloshim. It's 4 years now. And she, every night, is doing a Kaddish minyan for people. And so Zoom is doing an interesting thing. There are Kaddish minyanim all across the country in different time zones that people are saying. So it's a strange time. It's hard to know exactly how it's going to land. The book that I put together with Rabbi Dale Friedman and Rabbi David Levin on end of life rituals in a virtual age speaks to that issue of different ways in which audio-visual technology and social media are being used in rituals. Today, people don't send Shiva cards. They say something on your Facebook page.
Right.
You know.
Facebook has become, that's replaced.
For better or worse.
Say again?
For better or worse.
For better or worse. Sometimes it's too much information. But that's another story for another time. The whole restructuring, or let's say involvement of death education. Now, my belief is, basically because of some of the work we do, is our generation, which wished to control a lot of the time that we were growing up, now is saying, well, we are going to die, so let's try to exercise as much control over our own death as possible. I recently attended a conference where this young doctor from New York City, Dr. Dugali, who wrote a book called The Lost Art of Dying. I don't know whether you're familiar with it. Her whole presentation in the resources part of this book, she mentions the Jewish views of the afterlife. So somehow she got a hold of your stuff. But she talks about this medieval Christian program for death education called Ars Moriendi.
Ars Moriendi, the art of dying, yes.
Right. And her whole focus of this presentation was on this and the attempt to relate it to exactly really what the Da'at Institute and what you're writing about is saying, look, this is part of life. There's an art, the use of the word advisedly, there's an art to this. Could you, play with that word? I mean, do you sense that in Judaism there is an art of dying?
I don't know how many people can claim they have all the copies of the Xerox copies of creating community resources that you had put together over many, many years. But I have all of them. And if you were just starting out, 30 years ago when you were doing that, I would have said, let's make sure that when you go to communities, you have conversations with them about putting in place death education and death support programs. You do all different kinds of creating community, but there is an art to doing that. We have in Judaism an incredible toolkit, and so many people don't even know about it, or so many people are uncomfortable about it because we live in a death-denying culture. Look, I also want to say there are certainly some positive inroads being made. I did a class yesterday for the Shomer Collective. And the Shomer Collective is doing a lot of issues around end of life. And they had a grant there were about 10 people online in my class that were educators. So we're They were teaching teachers how to teach about dying and death. Kavod V'Nichum has been around for a while. There's an offshoot of that now, the Ben Zakkai Institute.
Ben Zakkai Institute, right?
Right. So there are movements in this direction, but it's still swimming upstream.
Mm-hmm.
It's still swimming upstream.
There's this lovely little poem towards the end of the book that called "Sandcastles Don't Last Forever." The imagery is so many people who've been to the beach and with their kids with the buckets and built the sandcastles, only to see the tide come in and it disappears. It's the imagery is really very real. It's because so many of us have lived that as kids and as parents, and hopefully, God willing, as grandparents. Could you walk me through that poem a little bit, sort of like unpack it for us?
We were in Ship Bottom.
That's in New Jersey, everyone.
It's in New Jersey, on Long Beach Island.
Long Beach Island.
And I guess my kids were like 12 and 4, 14 and 6. And my wife was building castles in the sand with them. And for whatever reason, I just didn't feel like getting off my beach chair. But I was watching them and both marveling at my wife's ability to just take such pleasure in what they were doing. But as somebody who has spent most of my adult life thinking about life's changes and finality, I had my journal and my fountain pen, and I wrote the following poem, which I would like to read.
Now, go ahead, please.
Sandcastles don't last forever. There they are, playfully building a sandcastle on the beach. My wife, my son, my daughter. A sandcastle that will last, what, a few hours? Only until high tide washes it away? Not much longer than that. Not 15 years. Definitely not that long. Not even 12 years. Soon, my son will be a young man creating his own world. My daughter one day will grow to be a woman, busy with life and love. We probably won't build sandcastles anymore, and my wife and I may be just too old to schlep our beach chairs to the ocean. So for these moments, enjoy the building of a sandcastle in the sand. Imbibe the holiness of this special moment before all is washed away, leaving only trace remnants of its eternal presence. And it was like, here we are. It's just a day at the beach. They'll build sandcastles, and then we'll go out for dinner somewhere. But it was also fixing that moment in time, because, as a matter of fact, my wife just said she has a wedding offer to do something on Long Beach Island on the day of on Father's Day. I said, the kids aren't going to want to schlep all the way to Long Beach Island for me on Father's Day. So the poem was a little bit prognosticative. Though we are still schlepping our beach chairs, my wife and I.
No. But the thing is, when I read that poem, and I really think it's a beautiful poem, not only the imagery, but it also speaks to, in the Musings with the Angel of Death, the presence and power in our tradition of memory and the creation of memory. And especially now that I'm a grandparent, I've talked to other you make these little moments of memory that's eternal, they're eternal. And that moment of building the sandcastle, so many of us have lived that. And so many times that little memory, that hour, whatever, becomes so powerful because memory, isn't it? Isn't memory such a powerful figure within our Jewish tradition?
It is. And the poem invites us to appreciate the memory as it's happening, to appreciate the magical nature of it, to appreciate both the ephemeral and the eternal. It's like, that's going to be gone, but it'll stay forever.
So again, we're talking with Rabbi Simcha Raphael, the founder and director of the Da'at Institute, and it's DAAT Institute dot, is it org?
Net.
I always get my comms, nets, and orgs confused. And about Simcha's new book, Musing with the Angel of Death, subtitled Poems of Love, Life, and Longing, available at the usual outlets, including the great God, Amazon. Be there, and you can be one of those Amazon Prime tribal members with Simcha. Before we leave the invitation, this poem towards the very, very end of the book, Sitting in Starbucks. Okay?
Yeah. Well, that's a little more whimsical, a little less philosophical, but it is a fun poem, if I may say so.
So go ahead and take us out with Sitting in Starbucks, as opposed to sitting in Dunkin' Donuts. But
I was sitting in Starbucks. It begins with me looking outside, and then I'm inside. Sitting in Starbucks. Cars and vans, trucks and buses whiz by, while white-haired, well-dressed ladies stop and chat, and rare and perfectly placed trees quiver in the wind, dancing to the constant hubbub of urban pulsations, all seen from the other side of this storefront window, a clear panoramic lens of vision to the outside world of resplendent vitality, while inside, another exquisite dimension unfolds. Subtle, soft jazz pleasantly permeates the space, replete with cushy, comfortable chairs, tiled tables, and carpeted floors. The aromatic scent of coffee wafts through the air, penetrated intermittently with the whirring sound of a bean grinder as the cash register registers yet another purchase of Starbucks coffee. The exotic auburn elixir of life, a frequently called upon solution to the demands of post-millennial stress. Espresso, latte, cappuccino, decaf, mocha, and more, so satisfyingly fulfilling primal yearnings of my caffeine-starved body. In the gentle pause of this transcendent moment, I am renewed, reanimated with soul juice. This is the pause that refreshes, good to the last drop. Yet even with soul thirst quench, an inexplicable impulse of uncertainty emerges from deep within. Suddenly, I lose my bearings, feel untethered in the galaxy, and with deep cosmic curiosity, I wonder to myself in earth-shattering silence, am I sitting in this Starbucks or at the one down the street?
Good way to end on a cup of coffee.
Right.
On a cup of coffee. Simcha, thank you very, very much for sharing your poetry.
Thank you for the work you are doing.
Listen, you just take care of yourself. Say hello to Razel, and just stay safe and stay healthy. And I'm sure we'll be in touch. But good luck with the book. Again, Musings with the Angel of Death. She is prominent in the book. Amazon and bookstores, good bookstores. And
DAATinstitute.net. I have a bookstore on my website also. The DAATinstitute.net.
To get a hold of Rabbi Raphael for talks and poetry readings and a lot of interesting and good conversation about, as he said, raising awareness and training around the issues of Judaism and the end of life. Thank all of you again, please, for your time and coming to us today. We really are very, very grateful for your time and interest in these podcasts. We appreciate your comments. Just email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com. visit us at the Facebook page. And again, same address if you'd like to make a comment, or perhaps your organization would like to become a sponsor of some of these podcasts. Just email me. We'll take it from there. Seekers of Meaning is produced, as usual. We want to give a shout out to our producer, Steve Lubetkin, the head of Lubetkin Media Companies. They're in beautiful, bucolic, serene, Starbucks-driven Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And there's a couple of Dunkin' Donuts hanging out too. That's where I hang out. And thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve, very much. Simcha, again, thank you. Take care of yourself. Say hello to your family. Stay safe. Stay healthy. To all of you, again, thank you. I look forward to seeing you on the next Seekers of Meaning podcast and TV from Jewish Sacred Aging. And in the meantime, stay safe, everybody. Stay healthy, most of all, and be kind to one another. Shalom. Todah.